This presentation is a public adaptation of a talk that I recently did at my employer. I've posted this public version in hopes that it encourages others to speak about their experiences with stress and burnout related situations in IT and to take care of themselves and each other. Included in the description of this video is a PDF of the handout and slides that also include additional information that I hope assists you on your journey. With that, I present to you Be Kind to Your Mind, Burnout and the Effects on Mental Health. So why are we talking about this today? Well, first of all, April is considered National Stress Awareness Month, and as IT professionals, we kind of know stress, right? And there's no hidden fact here that stress and burnout related incidents have been on the rise in IT, and it's really important that we begin to bring awareness to it. And there's often a stigma around discussing mental health and even being vulnerable to our coworkers or managers about identifying that maybe we've taken on too much and recognizing our limits and abilities. And, as IT professionals, we're often working in a fast-paced environment that, our clients are calling us not to say hello, but that something's broke. And it's causing a disruption to their business or whatever they may be doing. And over time, dealing with that day-to-day can be pretty overwhelming. And it's kind of prime to developing burnout. And, many of us probably have thought about this before, and we've probably been like, yeah, we've been super stressed out, or maybe we've seen someone even quit that works with us because they just couldn't handle it anymore. And so we kind of want to be able to understand how to identify this and recognize it not only in ourselves, but others. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to help identify that. So you might be thinking next, all right, Chris, you're a cybersecurity engineer, right? Well, what skin do you have in this game? So, right, I am currently a cybersecurity engineer for a managed services firm in Chicago. And one of the things I've done as I've focused on cybersecurity more is considering how much company culture actually affects the security posture of an organization. So we often think that users are our frontline defense in a cybersecurity situation, but not many of us really consider beyond training what else could be the human factor related to that. And additionally, I've been in IT for about 20 years as of this year. And in that time frame, I've experienced burnout twice, once in 2012 and again in 2018. And through this presentation, I want to share those experiences with you in hopes that it can create an honest conversation with others, whether that's your coworkers or whether that's with anyone online or however you feel necessary to get it out. But I also want to stress here that before I share those experiences, mine experiences and what led me to feeling burned out is not the bar by which you should measure yourself. We all have different abilities and capacities in how we're able to handle stress, and that's absolutely okay. There are different resources and methods and trainings we could maybe take to improve our stress capacity, but that's not the goal of this presentation. We have so many factors that can affect our stress management that include our environment, our self-value, our economic status, our family, our health, and the list really goes on. And so with that, let me share my first experience about burnout with you. So my first experience with burnout started in late 2009. I had lost my job as an IT professional in the financial sector because of the economic downturn. It happened a week before Christmas, no warning. For the next couple of years, I had worked various tech jobs and development jobs, mostly in a self-employment capacity, while being unable to find a full-time IT job. And in between those opportunities, my ability to pay my bills really kind of hinged on the decisions of bureaucrats in government to decide whether they were going to extend unemployment benefits or not. And that's really difficult because sometimes they would wait till long after and then they would try and catch up. So I often found myself taking on projects that would help me pay the bills, but as a result, overextended myself just to try and keep things going. And from that, I kind of reached a peak of my stress and being able to handle it, and I ended up developing a hernia from just the overload of it all. And when I went to seek medical care, I was discriminated against for my identity and basically told to just live with it. So it was a pretty desperate time for me, and it was pretty painful as well. And feeling like I had nowhere else to go, I ended up moving from Florida at the time over to St. Louis, and I actually started a job outside of IT for AAA as an emergency roadside dispatcher. And that was a completely different experience. And it was still high stress because you're working to assist people who are in emergency situations, whether it's the weather or whether it's because something happened with their car. But it's a really rewarding experience. And within 6 months of starting to work for them, my passion for technology started to come back. And I started, looking into my side projects and that I often use to keep my skills up and starting to work on them again. And despite the immense pressure in that environment, my coworkers were super supportive, and we all found ways of dealing with the stress of being in that kind of environment day in and day out. And we're able to find a way to just disconnect and still appreciate our lives, but also bring our full selves to work and be able to help someone throughout our entire shift. Even if sometimes that meant that, during certain winter months, we might be working long hours and coming back right bright and early to try and keep going. So by 2014, I was actually finally able to return to IT without this feeling of dread and that I couldn't handle it. So while I hope what I just explained here gave you kind of an example of what burnout could be like, let's define it, right? So burnout is a chronic stress that will creep up over time until it reaches a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. You tend to lose interest in your work and life. You lose the motivation you may have had for whether it's a particular role, a project, or even a career. And as that goes on, you start to lose energy. You grow cynical or resentful because you start feeling hopeless and helpless and like nothing really matters. And, if you've ever faced or know someone who's faced depression, it may sound a lot like that, but it definitely has its differences. And burnout is not something you have at work and then you feel great when you get home. It's something that affects you as a whole, and it can develop long-term changes to your body that'll make you more vulnerable to illness. And so some will probably say, hey, you're just stressed out. That isn't burnout, right? Well, there are two distinct ways we can separate the two. So let's get that out of the way. So when we're stressed, we often feel like we have some aspect of control, or we're hopeful that we can conquer it. So we often tell ourselves, I can manage this, or if I can get it under control, I can get it back on track. Though when we're burned out, the mindset and our motivation shifts. Instead, we may feel like we're stuck in a hole and we're trying to claw to get ourselves out of it. We might feel suffocated or drowned in obligations and responsibilities, and we have no idea where or how to start to change it. It's just overwhelming. You've kind of lost perspective. In essence, it's like the mind is shutting down to protect you from all this stuff that's going on. So you're no longer thinking of ways of mitigating it. You're now just kind of thinking about survival. So now that we understand the difference between stressed out and burned out, you're probably wondering, okay, well, what else can burnout feel like? So let's go through a few ways of what burnout can feel like, right? So it can feel like every day is just going to be too much. Like you're always on edge and you wonder, why do I want to get out of bed? I just have to work or take care of chores. It's a lot. It feels like a void. And you may start getting emotional or physical reactions to your phone, to your email, to messages. Sometimes even like panic or just adding stress. And that may go on for minutes or hours after a notification. You may just not feel like yourself, right? Or that what you're doing isn't making an impact, or that you're appreciated anywhere, or you're even downplaying what you do perform. You're probably not taking time out for yourself. There's so much going on. You're just trying to keep it all together and keep everything moving. And in the off chance you do find yourself with some time, it might end up just being spent just wondering about all that other stuff and going, hey, I still have all these other things to do, and kind of overthinking it until you get to a state where you are now faced with something you have to immediately deal with, and you no longer have the time to focus on anything else. And you might also start shaking or getting tremors randomly throughout the day with no explained reason. Could almost like you've drank a lot of caffeine, but you have no energy. You just have the shakes. While burnout can occur from a variety of situations, and through the example I've provided thus far, my own personal experience, I'm sure you're starting to build some ideas on how you can start ending up towards burnout, right? So, there are a lot of other factors can lead to burnout. Here's a couple that I've collected from my own experience, from others' talks, from other websites. And I want to point out a few of them here that I think really, really apply a lot to those who are in IT, right? One of them is that you love your job and take pride in your work. If you're a geek or a nerd or however you present yourself, you take pride in being able to solve problems, and you're generally relied upon. And when you start feeling like you're no longer being supported or belonging, you start feeling like it doesn't matter. And eventually it kind of eats at you. And we often take tasks on without consideration for whether we can do it, and that if we have the time to do it. It's just whether we have the ability to do it. You sit there and you think, hey, I've done this before. I can take care of it. No worries. Because we all want to be that team player, right? We don't really want to have to say no to someone. So, other factors beyond that could be that if you're on call frequently, maybe you are someone who works in a high-stake IT position that you're constantly dealing with tickets, sometimes over 100 a day. I have seen that before. Or maybe you're not being yourself at work. Maybe you're unable to be who you genuinely are. And that can be a very difficult situation as you balance a different identity and recognizing and policing everything you say or do to avoid possibly being recognized. And that can definitely add a lot to you. And, if there's unequal work tasks, or if your compensation is different from that of your colleagues, even though it's equal work, if the company doesn't have any clear vision or direction, or even just a general lack of resources, which it's IT, right? That seems to be almost the vapors we drive on, is a lack of resources. But it is something that, if left unchecked, just creates an even bigger problem and situation that is going to lead to a series of burnouts of multiple people, right? So try to lighten the mood a little bit, right? And I want to pause here for a moment. So what I'm showing here is, kind of why we don't talk about it, right? So here's a comic strip called Thready the T-Rex. And Thready the T-Rex, I think, best relates to this right now. And so Thready's asking his friend, Freddy the Raccoon, why he won't say something about how people are not always nice to raccoons. And Freddy's response is, well, we're not always sure that will help. I know I've felt that way before. And when we're dealing with mental health and we're dealing with the idea that we have to say that we are having trouble or that we can't do something, we feel like we're letting people down. that we're not the awesome people that everyone says we are. And that's not the case. So, if anyone has seen Mean Girls, I feel like stress is Regina George. And honestly, who hasn't been victimized by Regina George, right? So now that we understand what burnout is and some of the factors that contribute to it, we should probably think about ways we can get rid of it, right? So let's start with ways that we can help ourselves. One of the ways I found that helped a lot is to take a moment to breathe. Step away. If things are getting overwhelming and you're able to, take a moment to assess everything. Write things down if you have to. Try and refactor what's going on. If you have friends or that you can trust to talk to, they could be your trusted group, or maybe they're your tribe, or even if it's coworkers or your family, like being able to talk to people you can trust and confide in to help talk through some of the situations you may be experiencing is something that can be very therapeutic. Focusing on a work-life balance and being able to say, hey, I've set out this much time for work and I've set this time out for my life is really important, because we have obligations in our lives that are social, that are family related, that are professional. And if we over push everything on one side, we're starting to neglect the others. And while sure, there's overtime, there's projects, there's other situations that come up that may temporarily off balance it, a chronic situation can start neglecting and making others around us feel like they don't matter. And it's important that we really work on that. If you're having a lot of difficulty, reaching out for professional help is absolutely a good idea. In my second experience of burnout, I actually had to start going to a therapist. I was not able to handle it, and I don't know if I even really handled it the first time that well. And so being able to reach out and talk to someone is absolutely, if it's something you can do, go do it. Scheduling rest is another thing. We're not talking just going out and going on vacation and magically everything is going to be better. I'm talking about being able to say, okay, at the end of the day, I'm going to spend 30 minutes playing my favorite video games or something else, something to disconnect your mind and just clear it out of everything that's going on. Then scheduling those more prolonged ones as you can, of saying, all right, I'm going to go, whether it's a staycation or a vacation, and disconnecting from work for a while. Another thing that could help is finding other interests that can shape around your work commitments. So something that could be flexible, because we may sometimes be on call, but also something that doesn't necessarily pull us into our work again. So if, let's say, every day you're working to help people's general IT work, help desk, and you're running into a situation where you're helping a small business after hours, that's awesome. That's great. But it may just start pulling you back into work, because you're going to be looking for those quick solutions. And our minds generally will pull toward what makes it easier. And so we'll start referencing work resources and ideas to try and help accomplish that. So you may want to avoid situations like that. Unless it's necessary for work, you should avoid staying connected to work 24/7. It's really not a good idea to be attached to your phone, to always be checking your emails. You have to be able to separate the two between your work and your personal life, which kind of leads into the idea of taming your digital attention seekers. Being able to turn off your notifications to stop the badges from showing how many missed emails you may have or how many tweets you're missing, because then they're just sitting there saying, hey, you have a message. It might be important. And you're going to start thinking about that message or messages until you actually check them out. And honestly, they may be nothing, right? And oftentimes they may actually be nothing, but we're adding to our tension and our stress every day by constantly checking them and going, oh, I have a notification. Another thing, of course, is recording what you've succeeded at. It's very easy to think negatively, and we want to be able to have something we can reference that says, hey, yeah, we've had this bad day, but look at all this awesome stuff we just recently did, or even the same day, this awesome stuff we did, or the different things we solved and the different folks that we've helped. Like, it can help you bring your perspective back and understand that you're doing an awesome or great job and just keep going forward. And part of all this is, of course, restructuring how you approach things, right? So refocusing your work-life balance, being cognizant of what your timing is. And if you're finding yourself saying, I can get that done in a week and it's taking you 3 weeks, maybe it's time to reassess the timeline you're giving everyone. And that's not a negative. It just means that we have to be realistic with ourselves and understand that we can only do so much. And we have to be present for the things that matter to us in our life. And most of all, you need to give yourself time. I wish it was easy to say, yeah, you can do this, go do that, and in 3 weeks you'll be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Though I know that's not the case. And it can take weeks, months, or even years to address the feeling of burnout. And once you've gone through it before, it's going to be even easier to actually go into burnout again, because it's kind of like falling back into old habits and situations. So that's some of the things that you can do to help yourself if you're finding yourself in a burnout situation. But what about if you're trying to help someone else? Well, let's go with what you shouldn't do first, right? So, things not to do. Tell someone it's all in their head. When someone's in a state of burnout, their mind has essentially shut down. They're not worried about how to resolve a situation necessarily as much as they'd like to. It's more about their survival. It's more about finding a way to just get out of the weeds. And being able to be present for them and listening to what they may have to say could be the start for their journey to get better. So it's important to stay with an open mind, not to shuttle them to someone else, and be their advocate in a sense. And obviously, if someone is needing professional help, if they're thinking about self-harm or anything like that, then absolutely you want to include people that can help in getting them professional assistance. But we should never just offload someone or tell them it's all in their head. We shouldn't tell people to just go on vacation. It's kind of a destinational resolution, right? We think, oh, you could just go off for a week to Tahiti and magically everything's better. And again, burnout takes a while to get through. It's something that is built up. It's not going to go away from a single vacation. The same with eating better. Can certainly maybe improve someone's health, but it's not going to get them out of a high stress mindset. Practicing mindfulness can sometimes feel like someone's just disregarding you. And sure, for some, practicing mindfulness and practicing, meditation and things of that nature can help someone, but we shouldn't be telling them to do that. Let them find their journey. We can maybe give suggestions, but don't encourage them to necessarily go, oh, you can just go to this yoga class and magically you'll feel better. Above all, don't put yourself in their shoes, right? So if someone comes up to you and they're entrusting to talk to you about a situation that they're experiencing, appreciate the fact that they've entrusted you with that. And recognize that what they're talking to you about may only be the tip of the iceberg. It may not actually be everything they're dealing with. So by trying to put yourself in their shoes and in their unique perspective, you may end up missing a lot of what's going on. So really, you want to be there to support them and encourage them and help them along the way, but they're the ones who have to take the journey. And lastly, especially if you're a manager, maybe a colleague that has supervisory abilities, please don't take work or reduce someone's obligation without discussing it first. You know, when you're stressed out, when you're having a lot going on, sometimes it's not work that's causing the problem. Sometimes it's the outside life. And maybe work for that person is being able to be someone who's contributing, to be someone who is saying, you know, the rest of my life is really going bad right now, but at least I feel like I matter to these folks. So you want to avoid, as well-intentioned as it might be, to take stuff away from someone who might be super stressed or burned out without discussing it with them and making sure if that might even help them or not. So what about some ways you could help? Well, you could be a good example, right? Show that it's okay to take care of yourself. Take sick days if you're sick, or work remotely if you have to, and it's a situation where you can't really take days off. Show that you can manage the workflow. Show that you can prioritize and that it's appropriate to take the time to heal. It's really not good, especially in IT. You know, we are heavily relied upon, but having a friend pass away and going to work after hearing it, or even the next day, you got to give yourself some time. And I'm guilty of it. I will admit that straight out. There have been times where I've gone to work, or I've been at work and then got notification that a friend has passed or a family member has passed. And I don't sit there and just leave. And that's a mistake, because you're not taking the time out to take care of yourself. Another way you can help is by being the defender to your colleagues or your team, and also yourself. Be willing to push back on things that are unreasonable or excessive on you or your team, and above all, speak out about it. The only way I was able to talk about this in front of my coworkers was because I spoke up. I spoke up about my concerns of people leaving. I spoke up about my concerns of people feeling like they were lost and that they couldn't handle things anymore, because I've been there. And I know that if more people were there to support them, they may not have left. And again, you know, that all comes down to a person's individual decision on whether they do. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be there to support them. If you've received feedback, close that feedback loop. You know, if you're an employee and you got something from a manager or a boss, it's good to say, hey, I received it, because sometimes managers get even less feedback than you do as an employee. But also as a manager, if you're receiving feedback or ideas or suggestions, same thing applies, right? Should be sure to follow up on them. Try and push them up the chain if you think that they're going to be beneficial. Or even if you don't, still present it anyways. And just let that person know that their feedback has been pushed through. And if there's any, updates that come from that feedback, be sure to let them know that too. That encourages feedback and benefits everyone. And even if you may feel, hey, this idea wasn't the best, it's still going to encourage them, because then when they do have that blockbuster idea, they're going to be willing to talk about it. Another thing you could do is valuing different forms of contribution. Oftentimes, and this kind of ties in the end superhero status stuff, is we value how much someone works and how hard they work, and not necessarily what else they're contributing. There are different people with different skills that are on our teams, and those that are masters at collaborating or mentoring or preventative maintenance or documentation or even working cross departments can all be very valuable components to a team. And so you want to avoid going to the idea of always holding someone up on a pedestal based on how long they're working. If our other colleagues can only work 40 hours because they have life and social obligations, maybe they go to school, maybe they have nonprofit work they do, that shouldn't reduce how much they're seen or valued. And we have to stop encouraging that, right? We have to be able to say, hey, you worked how much? That sucks. How can we fix that? How can we make that better? What can we all contribute to make that better for you? Because that shouldn't be what we're aspiring to. Because the more we work, the less effective we are. And we need that wind down time, and we need that ability to change our mind from work to social or personal or whatever have you. We've got to learn to work smarter and not harder, especially with the way IT is going and technology in general. It is more important than ever that we focus on keeping ourselves in check so that we stay on top of our game without destroying ourselves or our families or our friends. And lastly, you can call out your colleagues in private and please ask them the tough questions. Like, again, you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes, but the smallest tokens of identifying something going on with someone can really change their mindset. To give an example, one of the times I started noticing that something was going on with me, especially in 2018, was when someone approached me in the hallway and they said, "Hey, Chris, are you doing okay?" And I'm usually one to be like, "Yeah, hey, everything's good, right?" They said, "Well, you haven't been dyeing your mohawk and you're not really spiking your hair up much anymore. So I'm just concerned about you. And if you need to talk, let me know." And at first I didn't think much of that, right? But as that went on and other colleagues of mine started mentioning different things, which I am absolutely thankful for that they did, it started making me realize it. And so while I didn't initially talk to that individual about what might have been going on in my head, it definitely changed the mindset. And so sometimes even understanding what matters to someone may help them recognize what might be going on. And whether that's meaning or their belonging, maybe security, maybe the freedom or significance of something. And, again, that significance and meaning and belonging can come back from what we discussed earlier about taking away people's work and their contributions to a team. Like, we want to avoid that because that might be what matters to them. And that might just be what's keeping them together. So with that, I want to share my second experience of burnout with everyone. The second one started in 2018. And in 2018, I had taken on a lot of roles and responsibilities. I ended up getting promoted as supervisor of a network operations center. And through that promotion, my stress was skyrocketing. The leadership kept changing in my department. And so I was starting to lose track of my career because there'd be one plan and then it would change because there's this different change of guard per se. And I wasn't feeling very supported or appreciated. And even despite that, I was still even spending time encouraging and mentoring my coworkers and kind of putting on a game face showing nothing was wrong. And during that time, I actually ended up going to Microsoft Ignite and attending a talk by Sonia Cuff. And her talk was called Service Degraded, recognizing burnout in colleagues and yourself. And it started to get me thinking. And I was starting to worry about maybe I wasn't handling things the best I was. Because throughout that conference, my mindset started shifting. And I was actually able to write a blog, which I hadn't done for months, even years. And so I started wondering, and that earlier reference I mentioned about the person stopping me in the hallway, that had happened about 3 weeks before I had left for Ignite. After that, about 3 members of my family all came up with cancer diagnoses within a couple weeks of each other. Then close family members needed financial support. I had a local friend attempt suicide. And it was a lot to handle, being able to try and be there for everyone and feeling like I didn't know where my career was going and feeling like it wasn't doing as good as I thought it was and thinking, hey, I got to this point, but now I'm not feeling so good about it. And I was really primed to basically throw in the towel. I had no plan because I didn't want to handle it anymore. Luckily, a few of my coworkers did notice the continued reduction in my contributions and what I was doing and just like coming in and zombieing, right? And so I ended up having to take professional help. It was starting to bother my partner. It was starting to bother my coworkers. And I was starting to recognize there was something going on. And after taking professional help from a therapist and psychologist, it helped me recognize and maybe recollect what was going on. And I started standing up for myself more and speaking up about my concerns. And it ended up helping me get a transfer that I was pushing for to lead into cybersecurity as a full-time thing instead of something that's always been a side component of what I do. And my work stress has shifted dramatically, right? And I started feeling more optimistic, and I know I'm not back to where I was before this last instance, but I am progressing. And part of that is also trying to bring awareness to this so that hopefully I also take more heed in my own understanding of this and from what I learned over at Ignite. So, in ending, we really have to start the conversation with ourselves and each other. This isn't just a problem at a particular employer. This is a bigger problem within our industry and our community. And only through our collective awareness and diversity of perspectives can we improve that environment. And so on this last slide here, I wanted to provide information, that additional resources. If your employer has an employee assistance program, see if they do. And if they do, call them up. They can help refer you to resources, and they may also have counselors on hand. There's different self-help tools. I do recommend, if you want another insight, watch that talk by Sonia Cuff from Ignite 2018 called Service Degraded. I believe it's currently on YouTube. There's also, on the right side here, I've presented information for an organization called Hope for the Day, which is a proactive suicide prevention nonprofit based here in Chicago that actually helped me after one of my rugby teammates committed suicide, and helping me help others avoid it, along with other resources that may help you or someone if they are having some serious mental health concerns or a veteran or anything like that. And it's through the collective awareness that we are going to get through this. And the last I want to leave you with is that I heard first from Sonia at that Ignite conference was, burnout is not a badge of honor, and it's not a badge of shame either. And that's really something we want to keep in the back of our minds. We want to be those team players. We want to be that someone that people can count on, but we have to recognize our own limits, and we have to respect our lives. Because without that, all we're doing is working, and that's not really something any of us want to do. And it is okay to ask for help, and it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to say, no, I'm not feeling that good today, but I'm working through it. It's through that honesty and that vulnerability and that collective understanding that we will all find this a better industry and community.